Hey out there, YouTube family. Welcome to another video of the Kevin Strong Show. And in this video, we're going to talk about the U.S. consumer. $16 trillion in consumer debt. We're going to talk about this topic. It is an alarming stat. It's nothing to be happy about. I think what's happening is people are just tapped out. I've talked about this in other videos, but more importantly, people are starting to lose their jobs. People are getting to the point where they're continuing to be squeezed by inflation to the point where they actually have to borrow and put things on their credit card just to meet their monthly obligations. So as a result of that, debt is just continually going higher and higher. Mortgage applications are starting to increase a little bit because people are squeezed so tightly. They're forfeiting that 3% 30-year fixed rate that they got last year, and they're rolling that into maybe a 5.5, in some cases 6% 30-year fix, just so they can get some debt relief. So they're rolling that debt in at a higher payment, but once that payment is amortized over a 30-year period, it lowers the payment, but your overall interest, it's just a hot mess. More importantly, people are doing this at the most inopportune time because, in my opinion, I think clearly the housing market is turning down. And at the time, people are basically treating their homes as an ATM, stripping out as much equity as possible to pay off that debt, right at the same time that the value of their home is going to go down. So don't be surprised, excuse me, that if within the next 6 to 12 months, you start hearing stories come out in the various news outlets talking about people being upside down in their homes, basically saying, or that statement is saying, you owe more than what the house is worth. So without further ado, let's get into the news. Sorry, I got a little cough. Americans are piling up credit card debt as they struggle to keep up with the high cost of living. So we're going to dive into this article and talk about it because this is something that's affecting a lot of people. The article starts off by saying Americans are piling up credit card debt as they struggle to keep up with the high cost of living. And that's what I said at the opening of this video. Hey, inflation is just squeezing people to the point where they just can't take it anymore. Like Popeye used to say, I can't stand it anymore. But I guarantee you this time, spinach is not going to save the day. You're either going to have to increase your income, or like most people are doing, if they have equity, they're refinancing at a much higher interest rate. U.S. household debt surpassed $16 trillion for the first time during the second quarter, even as borrowing costs surged. The New York Fed said credit card balances increased by, look at this, folks, $46 billion just in the last quarter alone. So you know there's a lot of desperate people out there when you have to pay back debt at a higher rate, but you have no other option because you can't afford the debt based on your current situation. So that's just the step. That's the first step, and typically the last step into becoming insolvent from a consumer standpoint. Over the past year, credit card debt has jumped $100 billion in the last year, or 13%, the biggest percentage increase in more than 20 years. And this is why I keep telling people there's so many dynamics that are going on that can affect the housing market. I've been on record for years saying that the Trojan horse in this whole housing market is going to be disposable income. It's all about debt. I don't care how low your interest rate is. If you don't have the income to pay for your debts, you're in trouble. If inflation is squeezing away at your monthly debt, at your monthly income, you're in trouble. If your wages are not keeping up with inflation, guess what? You're in trouble. So these are some of the factors that's compelling these folks to go out and borrow more debt, even at a higher interest rate. High inflation is also making it more expensive to carry a credit card balance because the Fed Reserve is aggressively raising borrowing costs. So we all know about this, what the Fed's mandate is to try to get inflation under control. In my humble opinion, the bond market is clearly signaling that it's going to be a, what's the best way to say this? A deflationary recession. In layman's terms, there's one famous YouTube person out there. I'm not going to throw him under the bus because he could potentially be right, but I did mention him in this my last video. But he thinks 30-year mortgages are going to be at somewhere around 7 or 8% at the end of this year. I say no way. The bond market is screaming that the Fed's probably going to pivot before the first quarter of 2023. There's no way I see, in my humble opinion, based on the data that I've looked at, that we're going to be looking at 7 or 8% 30-year fixed rates in 2022 or anytime soon. So let me go ahead and dive into this article a little bit more. Not only are credit card balances rising, but Americans opened 233 million new credit cards during the second quarter. Here we go. The most since 2008, the New York Fed report found. That 2008 is an ominous year. Why? Because that was during the beginning of the great financial crisis. So there's a lot of parallels that are happening now that happened back in 2008, but a lot of people were in denial about it. And once again, you can draw your own conclusions. In my humble opinion, we're in uncharted territory. This is unsustainable in terms of these inflated asset prices, specifically the stock market and the housing market. And when you couple those two inflated asset classes with rising inflation and uncontrollable consumer debt to the point where people have to borrow credit cards at an even higher rate just to maintain their standard of living, it is a recipe for financial disaster. Let's see here. If there's anything else we wanted to talk about here, here we go. However, at the end here, credit reports indicate that the number of new foreclosures increased by 11,000 during the second quarter. The New York Fed said, potentially signaling the beginning of a return to more typical levels. I do not agree with this statement. I think if you have looked at any of the foreclosure data, what you're finding out is that obviously you're getting these hundreds of percent increase in foreclosures because we didn't have any last year because of the moratorium. But what people are not talking about, that you have to read deep into some of these articles, is that the number of delinquent mortgages, people who haven't paid their mortgages for at least 3 months, is increasing at an alarming rate. And those people who are 90 days plus late on their mortgage, that number or that percentage is higher than or close to what it was pre-pandemic. So this is 2019 data. So basically, typically speaking, once you hit that 3rd month period, the bank is going to start foreclosure procedures on you. And statistically speaking, there's a good chance that you've probably tried a loan modification to no avail. You've either reached out to your lender and they weren't able to help you, or like some people do, they shut down the communication altogether. And as a result of that, the bank or the lending institution starts the foreclosure process. And unfortunately for those folks, because they didn't proactively reach out to their lender, they end up losing their home. So statistically speaking, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I think probably over 70%, if not a higher, once you get to that delinquency rate of 3 months or longer, you're pretty much done. So it's a really sad situation, folks, when we see so many people out here that's basically giving up those great 30% fixed rates that they had locked in, and they've got to roll all of that into a higher 30-year fixed payment just to pay off their debt because they're, as I said earlier, wages aren't keeping up, inflation. So it's just a hot mess. If you're in a situation to pay off your debt, please, please, please do so. And if you have to buy a house, in my humble opinion, as a licensed real estate broker in the state of Washington, I would tell somebody to wait if you can, because prices are going to come down, especially in the Seattle area, in my humble opinion, because as I've said in previous videos, the house price to wage earner ratio is just too high. The average income in this area just doesn't support what it takes based on what you need to make for the average medium household. I'm sorry, for the average median house price in Seattle. So if the average household income in Seattle is like $90,000, and then the average medium home price is like $900,000, you do the math. It takes a lot of that annual income to be able to afford the house. A normal ratio in terms of your annual income in relationship to the house should be anywhere from like 2.5 to no more than 4%, right? I mean, 4 times. So if you make $90,000 a year, $360,000. 400 at the most. But those numbers are way out of whack in housing markets like Seattle, California, Boise, Idaho, certain parts of Florida. Miami is actually holding up quite well, even though there's a lot of surrounding cities that are basically starting to implode. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it found you in a good place. If you're enjoying this type of content, please do me the honor, smash that like button. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, comment, and share because I care. This was Kevin Strong, and I'll see you guys in the next video.